Hi everyone, welcome to Creative Concepts. Today we're joined by Louise Guinand and Scott Wentworth, and my name's Lois Adamson. I'm the Director of Education with the Stratford Festival. Welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about who you're talking with today. Louise Guinand is an award-winning lighting designer. She's designed over 550 shows across North America, and that includes more than 60 productions and 30 seasons at the Stratford Festival. I also understand, Louise, that you're only a few Shakespeares away from achieving your desire to light the whole canon. Is that right?
That's true. I think I'm 6 away now.
Incredible. And Scott Wentworth's work has been celebrated on Broadway, London's West End, and in theaters across North America. His career includes more than 25 seasons at the Stratford Festival as both a director and an actor. And among his recent directing credits is the 2017 production of Romeo and Juliet. And that's what we'll talk about mostly today together. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you both for being here. So to start, Louise, we don't often get to talk to a lighting designer. As you said, you're mostly behind the scenes. How does lighting design tell a story in the theater?
It helps to indicate the time and the place and set the mood, and it can be realistic depending on the piece, or in a piece like Romeo and Juliet, we venture into some parts that are realistic and some that go to what Scott termed meta in Romeo and Juliet. So we're abstracting or highlighting. Sometimes we're focusing where the audience is looking. We're helping them know time of day and location.
And do you two remember some of the initial conversations you had about this production?
Oftentimes at the festival, we put very elaborate sets on our stage. And a lot of times, even when the sets aren't terribly elaborate, we create subtle changes in it. We decorate the balcony section differently, or we put down a floor covering to suggest a particular place or something that we may want to say about the play. And so the festival stage with its wood and the balcony that was designed for it hadn't been seen by our audiences in many seasons in exactly the way it was. And I was very interested in rediscovering that stage to give our actors, particularly our younger actors, because of course it's Romeo and Juliet, so there's a lot of young people in it, an opportunity to experience and play with that stage and to see what was possible in this extraordinary space that Tanya and Tyrone bequeathed to us. So, in that way, Christina's work as a designer primarily was about what people were going to wear and what they were going to carry onto the stage rather than what we put on the stage, which meant that a lot of what in another type of theater might be scenery fell to Louise. A lot of it then centered around, how do we work in this space? How do we go from a realistic moment to a meta-theatrical moment, a more mythological moment, when the script seems to indicate that? How do we move effortlessly from one world to another world? And a lot of that in the festival stage will fall on the lighting designer and on the relationship between the lighting designer and the director. And Louise and I have worked together a lot over the years. We have a great relationship, and in a way that's probably more important for a lighting designer and a director than any other designer, because lighting is not a plastic medium. It exists in space, in time, and on particular actors' bodies. And although Stratford has great technical resources, and we devote quite a bit of time toward that transition period from rehearsal room to performance, it's still a very limited time, and so it's very important for a lighting designer and a director especially to have a shared vocabulary. In the case of Louise and I, shared experiences with other directors that we've worked with over our time, because we have to create in the space of really a few hours stretched out over several weeks, the lighting world of the play. So it's a very intimate relationship, and it has to work really quickly in a limited amount of time.
I'd add, Scott, that one of the things that it also plays in to having a good communication base is when there's a discovery on stage in the rehearsal time, being able then to change direction. And because there was a couple of things we discovered after we'd done the lighting cues without the actors. Once we added the actors, we discovered we wanted to try something different.
I find that especially interesting when you think about the fact that Shakespeare was traditionally performed in daylight. And watching this production, I was thinking about that a lot, about the passage of time and how would this appear traditionally. Louise, you've worked so much in Shakespeare. Is it particular? Is lighting Shakespeare different?
I guess one of the differences is he didn't write time of day other than in his text. So you have to go by his words and you have to dig into it. I used to actually use Romeo and Juliet as a teaching exercise for exploring text for lighting designers. So they had to find the clues within the script as to whether we were indoors or outdoors. Because it would have just been a progression for him in his day, he doesn't, I guess, provide the setups to segue in the same way, if that makes any sense. But there's so much magic in doing his shows because you have these momentary scenes. You frequently have a solo moment, a soliloquy, frequently at the end of something where you can pull in and focus intently and then explode the stage open as you go into the next scene. And one of the magics of the festival stage is having the two bombs and the two doorways and up center and sometimes the louver. So you can go from that one isolated, tight moment to people flooding in from everywhere. And at the same time, you flood the stage with light. So you can easily take a dramatic change in atmosphere and mood with that.
I always want to be very careful because we can do all these miraculous things with lighting. To never get ahead or create a kind of separate story to the story that Shakespeare is telling. I was a little more puritanical in my early collaborations with Louise. When we did the Henry IVs, I kept saying, stop moving the lights so much. I want to see more stuff. I want to see what's going on upstage. Don't tell me to only look here. Don't do this. I've since grown up and have a greater appreciation for both the artistry and the potential uses of light to help us tell the story. But I think that basic kind of feeling that primarily the focus in Shakespeare is created through the language as the actor encounters it and the audience hears it.
Because the language of Shakespeare isn't necessarily natural to the modern ear, it's important that people be able to see it clearly, that I not distract with doing lighting that breaks their focus. And it's also said frequently that if you underlight any actor, if you can't see them, you can't hear them. So if you underlight someone for too long, you can do a little bit of selective underlighting, but if you underlight for too long, the audience stops hearing them properly. The same is true if you overlight, if you're glaringly bright. So if I go either of those journeys or keep changing things too much, the audience's ears don't always listen or catch the nuances of the language. And especially in Shakespeare, where there's frequently more than one storyline going on, you need to support their hearing, I guess. Is that accurate, Scott?
I think that's a great point, and it applies across the board. If I make a directorial decision or in collaboration with the actors, an acting decision, a character decision, you don't want to give the audience too much information at once that they can't take in. The poetic language is, I don't think it's hard for people to understand, but I do sometimes think in the theater we make it harder for them to understand because we're sending so much other information. We have sound and fury and sometimes it does signify nothing because we overburden the audience. And so I try to be very careful in my work with the actors and in my conversations and collaborations with the designers, that we don't give the audience information that either they don't need or they're not in a position to process. And sometimes when we get ahead of ourselves with design and giving us too much information, we obscure the real information, the information that we actually need. So you know, I mean, in a way, the first question that Louise and I always faced was, you know, can we see them? Because if we can't see them, it doesn't matter. And then everything else on top of that is artistry, because, you know, in an outdoor theater with no roof in the middle of the afternoon, you can see everybody.
Sometimes in creating the looks for the show, we'll try something which is sometimes overdoing it. And then when we see it with the actors, Scott will turn to me and in a very low voice, I'll hear Louise, and I'll know it needs to, you know, cut that extra 3 cues in the middle of that sequence.
Louise, do you find your design is greatly influenced during that preview period when you have an audience in?
In part, that depends on the director that one's working with. Scott has a really good eye on what's going to work through. So with things like the Romeo and Juliet that we did together, not a lot changed during previews.
Certainly nothing major changed.
No, we'd found the path through. I have had other productions at the main stage where there's been a total rethink on a scene on, you know, it was on the main stage and it's moved up to the balcony. And so that does happen, but it certainly didn't happen with this Romeo and Juliet. And because Scott keeps the story clean and the storytelling clean, there's less tendency to have a major rework in previews.
I've always had this understanding of Shakespeare that the Elizabethan audience, the audience for whom it was written, was a lot more comfortable with reading the play both narratively, which I always describe as horizontally. Somebody walks in one door, crosses the stage, and leaves the other door, and him and his friend, or her and her friend, the conversation as they move horizontally across the space is part of the narrative. And then the audience is also asked to watch the play kind of vertically. And the Elizabethan stage and our Tanya stage is a reflection of that, where it's not as literal as the actual Elizabethan stage, but you had the heavens above, you had hell below the stage, and the stage itself became a kind of map of the world. And so I think it was very easy for the Elizabethans to always look at the play in two ways, both allegorically and realistically, narratively. Our audience, our modern audience, for a lot of reasons, I think needs help with looking at the allegorical play. We're used to, through the great movement of modern drama, through films, to primarily view these plays realistically and narratively. I got a lot more information watching an audience watch the play and listening to an audience hear the play. But even so, I think those changes were relatively subtle. It was about, you know, enhancing a certain element that was already there, rather than completely rethinking a scene and going, oh, I thought this took place in broad daylight in the middle of a big empty room, and no, it takes place in a subway platform, and so we have to, you know, completely rethink it.
Yeah, and no, we certainly stayed on the track we were on, and I've certainly had shows where a location has moved that drastically.
Oh, sure.
But no, we stayed on the track we were on, and I think that's true of the other ones we did earlier. So I think the language that you create in the rehearsal hall and continues through in the stage space allows us to just fine tune once we're into the preview world.
Maybe just before we wrap up, could you speak at all to those who are watching this production, speaking to what you're talking about, that duality, the fact that this is a story happening on two different planes at once? Are there particular scenes or moments that stand out for you?
So the normal experience of seeing Romeo and Juliet is somebody comes out at the beginning. Usually they're the actor playing the prince. In our case, it was one of these widows, the lovely Sarah Dott. And she says, two households alike in dignity, and she sets the scene. And then at the very end of the play, either somebody comes out or the prince turns to the audience and then in the guise of chorus says, well, never was a story of more woe than this one, right? And kind of wraps it up. But there is a middle speech of chorus that's usually cut, and I decided I wanted to keep it in. And to me, that became a kind of doorway into how we were going to treat these allegorical moments that I wanted the audience to be aware of. The speech takes place right after Romeo and Juliet meet for the first time at the dance, the Capulets' ball. Romeo's on his way home, famously says, "Can I go forward when my heart is here?" Leaps over the wall, and the balcony scene takes place. But in the full play, before that event happens, the chorus comes out and says, well, they're in love. I wonder what's going to happen now. This could go very well. It could go very ill. There's some nice language in it, but it's not necessary for the narrative story, so it's usually cut. But we found it very helpful for the allegorical story. So we had the widows with their beautiful glowing orbs come out and interact with Romeo as they told him the story. And I always felt that scene was a kind of approximation of cleansing the space of the violence, of the patrimony, of the patriarchy, of young women being put up for sale in pretty dresses to the highest bidder, and to create a safe space where the two protagonists could meet and their hearts could speak to each other. It opened the door later to what people sometimes call the second balcony scene, which we staged very non-realistically, watching Romeo and Juliet just connected by a rope, and she held onto it wrapped around her body as he traversed the stage, and that was the last time they would see each other alive. The entrance into the tomb, we went into Romeo's head in a way and created the tomb around him rather than trying to create a realistic descent into the tomb. And all of those ways, although as I said, you know, the intention behind them was to give our audience a glimpse into an allegorical world that they might not ordinarily be drawn into in the storytelling. But it was also, again, going back to the Tanya stage, it was also about how do we use this stage? How does this stage work? And unlike a purely realistic stage, what's amazing about this stage is you can have a purely realistic moment. It's thrust, you're in the same room, you're 4 feet from the first row, and you're 6 feet from the person you're talking to. It's immediate, it's right there. But at the same time, it can transform in a breath into a completely allegorical space. And it can do that without scenery, without lighting, without sound, without anything but text telling us where we are. And so by following that, then we were able to help that transformation with lighting, to help that transformation with sound, to help that transformation with staging. But it was the play in action that we were trying to give room for, and to give the room to the play.
Louise, is there anything you would add for what the audience might look for in this production?
I think Scott's outlined it pretty well there, but those moments do allow for some more dramatic lighting. In essence, contrary to what I said about you can't go too dark, those were moments where it's about the shapes of the people moving, and we did have the benefit of dancers. So though those moments then expanded into something else, we could support them with more dramatic lighting to enhance, in essence.
We often talk about how verbal Shakespeare is, but Romeo and Juliet is a great example of also how he was writing. He was writing for the theater. He was writing about bodies moving through space. That, you know, Romeo and Juliet touching their hands is called for in the text. It's an image that's called for. We know there are going to be sword fights, and that's an integral part of the play. Bodies moving through space, not speaking. The dance. There are all sorts of, you know, do I drink this potion? No, I don't dare to drink it. Are gestural, and so the play asks for those moments as well. And when you have as our theater has, both technologically and with artists like Louise, when we have the ability then to highlight, no pun intended, those bodies in space through our craft and silent art, that we are, when I say we, I mean everybody, both the people who create the production, but also the audience who watches it. We are all the better for having those tools and having that expertise to highlight all aspects of the play. Again, I keep coming back to that our intention throughout was to make as much of this play available in the space as we possibly could.
I think you both have talked so beautifully about the layering and the collaboration to ultimately distill the work to be seen as it should be, seen and heard, as you've said. So thank you so much. I think that's an okay place to stop. Thank you for giving your time to this.
It's great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
And it's great to see you guys during these times of lockdown. It's always nice to see friendly faces. We miss you all, and see you soon.